All right, guys, so we got the powertrain back out of the Bronco. Again, it took us a few times to originally get it in there, but we finally got it out, and we've got it situated over here so that we can start throwing on some new parts. So the last few days, we've been getting together a few things in order to solve the mechanical implementation and getting this guy into the Bronco and situated there. You might notice we got some headers mock mounted up front, so we'll talk a little bit about that. As well as some of the other things that I want to get to here on again, just making sure this thing can physically get in there without any modifications to the major modifications to the car. And I think we can get to that point. So yeah, let's go ahead and start off with the headers here. So we knew that we probably need some custom headers. We opted right now just to see if we can fit in some spare shorties that we had off of another Coyote. It's looking pretty good with regards to fitment. Really the big key is when we first measured and took some pictures of kind of clearance with the motor in the car, we saw that really you can't have anything too high as well as certainly anything too wide. These seem to fit the bill pretty well. I was originally concerned on these shorty headers for like an F-150 or for a Mustang or something like that the Coyotes came in. One of the pipes usually comes up and ends up being too much in the way, especially on this car, to be able to mod it in. It just seems like it might get too close to the shock towers. These aren't looking too bad. I'll do a close-up here, but the two outer ones, and specifically on the driver's side, I didn't think it'd be like that, is just a little bit too low. So I'm worried that it's either going to clip the steering column joints, or the actual mount for the engine. On this side, honestly, it's looking pretty solid. I don't know if we're going to have any issues with it. If it is, it's just going to be a slight modification to this one. Unfortunately, since these are already made up, it's pretty hard to modify headers because of how they're welded in steps. So we might end up still making our own, but who knows, we might get lucky with another set. So we're going to keep looking at that, but we're definitely going to throw these in here in a little bit into the vehicle and see if they clear as is. The other thing that we told you guys is that there's a ton of space in the engine bay for this engine, or really any engine. There's just plenty of space regardless. And so we want to be able to try and get the entire powertrain moved back, probably on the order of like 3 or 4 inches. Because of how the powertrain is situated on it, it's usually always on 3 points. So you've got the 2 engine mounts, one on either side of the engine, and then you've got usually one somewhere around the transmission. For 4-wheel drives, it's usually actually on the transfer case, not on the transmission itself, and that's certainly the case for these 4x4 Coyotes powertrains. And so on this F-150, I believe this is a Borg-Warner 1466. I might correct myself on that. But these cases have been used for a long time by Ford for 4x4, ultimately with 3 speeds now at least, 4x2, 4x4 high and low, and 4x4 auto. The only disadvantage, and I think we told you guys this in the last episode, is the angle on this TC is definitely not ideal. We would have to cut the floor in order for it to fit. And so when we were messing with it in the vehicle this first time, we saw a few pieces here on the casing that would ultimately have to be modified. And even so, we still think just because of the angle, we measured it. I think this one is around 28, 30 degrees, and the Bronco's is closer to like 45, 46 degrees, relatively. So definitely not an ideal case, and we really don't want to try and cut the floor off the bat. So we've been doing a bunch of research. We had a few contingency plans. There's some good news and some bad news with it, but I think we stumbled upon the best case scenario that we can have with the most limited loss of functionality. There's really only one thing that we think we're going to lack from the original vehicle. Otherwise, everything will still be in place. So we're going to share with you guys that pretty soon. But what we're first going to do is get this transfer case off. and just so we can get the engine back in there, get it moved back further without it clipping on the points in the transmission tunnel. So in order to get any of these TCs to work, we need to create a new trans cross member. And so what we've done is we're going to take the existing kind of design of the cross member that is in the vehicle already, and we're going to make a version that essentially just angles back out of the same mounts on the frame. The nice part is the entire cross member just comes out and drops out with four bolts on the sides and shear. And so we're going to make a new one of those that essentially angles the entire transmission mount point further back in the vehicle as much as we think is suitable for the engine to the back of the firewall. So that's certainly a big step. We're pretty happy with how we think it's going to work out. It should be pretty good. We've already got the steel picked up here. So we're going to start working down that line. Our new option for transfer case is going to show up here in a few days. And so then the last part that I wanted to get to was the oil pan. So the oil pan almost always has to be fixed in some manner to be able to clear the steering rack. In this case, these are electric assist steering racks, so there's no actually hydraulics in it. So it's a little bit larger of a unit, as well as the front differential. Ideally, those are close together, so you have plenty of space and you can throw the sump on one side or the other. In this one, it's similar to an F-150. And actually, we'll show you guys that the pan actually fits it perfectly. It just has to be put further back. So we're crossing our fingers that the distances in all of this kind of line up perfectly, that as we move this engine back, the oil pan is actually going to sit really well with how it looks like it would have been designed originally for an F-150 4x4 application, and it already has the nice little jut for the differential, which is really cool. So we're crossing our fingers. We might get lucky on some of this. If we don't, it's not the end of the world. We'll be able to fab up some headers. We'll be able to fab up or modify some of these pans without too much detail. This was the real big killer. We knew that we needed to get something in there. We didn't want to cut the body for the vehicle. And so with this new transfer case option, and I'll probably just make a segment just about the transfer cases and what they can do, we think we've got it solved. So definitely a good step forward for it. So right now we're going to kind of just detail a little bit on that cross member, and now then we're going to go ahead and get this transfer case off and get the entire powertrain back in the vehicle, see how the header's clear that we have right now, take a few pictures, take a few measurements, and I think then we'll be on a pretty good way to be able to get this thing finally positioned in the car, and then we can finally worry about the electrical. So let's go ahead and get to it. See what I'm talking about here, at least on the driver's side header that we've got. Again, these are just some cheap headers that we had around, but we just wanted to see what the shape was and what kind of clearance we're dealing with. But these are off a Coyote and a Mustang, and so this first runner here kind of goes a little bit too low and a little bit far out. Definitely could come back over and come back into the collector this way. That would give us a little bit more clearance So if we need to make our own, I'm thinking this is going to be the point when we test fit it here that's going to give us the most issue. And if it's not actually touching the the shock tower, my bet is it might end up interfering with how the stock motor mounts are in the car that we want to try and reuse. So let's look at the other side. If we look at this side, honestly, it's pretty good. I was concerned about this jut right here coming up and getting too close to the shock tower, but it really isn't too bad when it's finally bolted up here. So we'll go ahead and get the studs back in here. We got some bolts coming as well, some grade 8 bolts we'll end up using for whichever headers we have. But yeah, if there is an issue, it would be this guy. I don't think it is, but you know, again, we always got to check. So we're gonna go ahead and get these guys bolted up and throw this thing back in the car and see if these shape headers would fit and what kind of modifications would have to be if they do not. All right, guys, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the clearance issues that we're seeing in the car after our first couple attempts getting the motor in. First off, some of the things we said in the beginning. So this ABS module and certainly the towers, those are always kind of like in the way. Some of these brake lines. Really, it's nice that the steering column here has two joints in it, so it's definitely getting it out of the way. So I'm not too concerned about that. You can see here that the engine mounts that we want to try and reuse, they're actually staggered. So it'll be interesting to see if we're going to be able to pull that off with how the headers we have are. On the other side, it's much less restricting. Really, it's just this tower that's in the way with that V-block. Otherwise, really, there isn't much issue. So what I really wanted to show you guys is just how crazy some of these parts line up. It's like almost thinking that, you know, maybe Ford or the engineers that working on the cars did either think that maybe they would put a Coyote in here at some point, or they were just reusing parts and ideas set forth in the, you know, the other SUV and truck lines. Regardless, this is the factory Coyote oil pan for a 4x4. If we look down here, it already has a notch in it for a front differential, and the spacing here is honestly crazy. The only catch, in order for this to fit the way we'd really like it to, is the whole motor does have to move back, which is what we were already planning to do, but it's just whether or not those distances meet up with how we really like this thing fitting so that we have adequate clearance, because obviously the motor and that powertrain actually moves during driving or during engine revving, essentially torque application, and so you'll have some torque and movement in that powertrain. So we want to make sure there's adequate clearance on the oil pan so it doesn't touch any of the components down here or anything on the side for that matter. But anyway, it's looking really promising with the stock oil pan. If we don't, if we're not able to use this one, it seems like it might be really a matter of just some simple modifications to be able to get this guy set up, or you know, there might be one or two oil pans that already have some clearance like this that we might be able to swap in. So anyway, it's really looking good here. It's honestly crazy how easy it is to get one of these motors in here. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and try and get the motor with the headers in there right now without the transfer case and take a look at some of the clearances. We might even be able to sneak in this oil pan. All right, guys, so we tried it one more time, getting it in there. It's looking really good, but we've really got to change how our wonderful Harbor Freight load leveler, still haven't gotten a new one, but at least we modified this one so that we can quickly adjust it. We need to probably take the intake off, and we're gonna go directly to the intake valley for this guy, because we're just running up against this too much, because there's like another 4 or 5 inches this whole thing needs to go. But the headers themselves are looking really good. We think as long as this entire engine moves back, we're gonna be able to clear on both sides, maybe with even these headers. We might still end up getting new ones, but at least right now we just want to test fit it. So we're gonna go ahead and take the intake off. We already know everything up top is gonna clear, no issue whatsoever, so we might as well take it off, get some good points so we don't run into anything. All right, guys, we got the intake off. These are super easy to get off, obviously, for a V8. You can see the direct injectors here, the other port injectors on top of the intake. So one way or another, we would have had to take this off for what's to come, but it's good to see. We've got some good mounting points here, some good mounting points here. So we're gonna reposition our load leveler and get it down in here so that we can clear the back part of the cowl on the back of the Bronco's engine bay. So hopefully that'll allow us to get really nice, neat in there so we don't have to do this test fit another time. All right, guys, so we got the motor in for, what is this, like the 3rd or 4th time now, and went all the way that we could, and we're so close. We've got the passenger header here. We're just close to contacting on the control arm, upper control arm here. It's honestly pretty close, and we think that if we get it in its final resting spot, it might actually be below the control arm, because right now we're still about an inch or two too far forward. On the driver's side, not super happy with how the way these headers are designed, where you'd immediately interfere with that control rod. You can kind of see right there. So yeah, we can't go any further on that one, but the nice part is now that we've seen how the headers ultimately fit in here, again, these are shorties. We ended up finding a design that we think is going to fit pretty darn well. They're already, so these are 1 7/8 runners to a 3-inch collector. And the ones that we're getting are 1 7/8 as well. So we already know that these new ones should be able to fit. On this side, the first run here, that's the problem, should go straight over and down. So we're gonna be able to completely clear that steering rod. Everything else here is just, honestly, it's going crazy with regards to how well this thing is gonna fit. So we've already, I'm pretty sure, cleared our alternator. When it's actually bolted in here, it should sit behind the module, and ultimately, you know, we can move this guy around a little bit now that we've unbolted it. So honestly, I think we're gonna be able to be perfect there. And so now what the plan is, so we're almost flat and we're almost down to the final position of the motor. We've got it suspended on a jack in the back right now. But the last step that I want to do here today is take off these headers that are going to interfere on both sides, and then we are going to throw on the stock oil pan. I was showing you guys earlier that just laying there, the oil pan fit perfectly even with that front differential. And you know, at least kind of eyeballing things with how the motor's set up right now, I think we're almost already at that point with it. So I want to test that out and see if it is literally is like a plug and play kind of swap, that we can have some aftermarket headers and the original oil pan from a Gen 1, Gen 2 in this thing, and it already clears everything. Beyond that, it's just the motor mounts, and we found so this is obviously an inline 4 motor that we took out. The motor mounts for the V6 obviously should be very similar to how a V8 is placed into a vehicle. And so we ended up finding some V6 motor mounts that we can grab real quick. And those are lower profile and a more common design with a kind of leaf over where the rubber isolator goes in between the two forks, and that I think is going to be perfect. And so a little bit different of a thought on how we're going to make the brackets for the motor mounts, but honestly that's how typically the Coyote is made, even in like an old Bronco swap. So we're pretty excited to get those in there. They swap right into the mounts here and on the other side, and then it's just a matter of making the plates and that fork, and that whole fork and plate adjustment is going to be key so that we can get this thing at the proper level that we like, to make sure it doesn't contact anything when it torques. So once we get this thing back out, we'll get it out halfway, throw on the oil pan, get it in there, and then I'll also be showing you guys what the kind of trans situation is. So looking under there, it's still looking good with our plan for the cross members. So anyway, let's go and get this thing halfway out, get those headers off and the oil pan on. Alright guys, so we got the engine in yet again with the headers off, the oil pan on, and this is just ridiculous. Everything is going in our favor here. The stock Gen 1, Gen 2 oil pan is fitting perfectly. We're probably about an inch right now, and we're actually maybe even too far in. The new issue is now we've cleared the alternator without a doubt. The alternator can fit, and it's just this oil pressure sender is getting a little too close to the steering rack portion. So honestly, if we just move it a little bit, we'll be able to clear it. But I'll show you guys here underneath of the vehicle in just a second. But yeah, this is crazy. Also the interference that we're talking about here with the bar that we took out, spanning on both sides, that is now just completely eliminated. We've probably got at least 1 inch to 2 inches on where that bar would be. So definitely the key takeaway here is the Coyote fits more than perfectly. You can even get probably the same weight distribution with like probably what 30-40 pounds difference with all the crap that's on the V6s. So this is future me wanting to clear up any misconceptions that I know some folks had when we first came up with this project. The actual motors that Ford has available to essentially put into this platform, and again, the reasons why they might not or why they would vary depending on who you talk to and kind of the regulations, etc. But beyond that, if we look at just the mass of the motors, specifically in this case the 2.7 liter or 3 liter that comes in the top tier Broncos right now, and that of the 5 liter that we're putting in, as well as their offerings on the much larger 3.5 liter EcoBoost, the actual mass for each one of those is actually pretty astonishing. A lot of folks have the misconception that the EcoBoost motors not only produce more power, but are also lighter given the lower number of cylinders. Well, that's not quite the case, at least in terms of weight. The actual mass of the smaller nano engines, the 2.7 and 3 liters, is about 10 to 20 pounds heavier than that of the aluminum block 5 liter, and that's simply because the nano block EcoBoosts, given that they have boost pressure from turbos, are made from cast iron blocks, similar to the much larger V8s produced by Ford and other companies. The 3.5 liter EcoBoost, also heavier. It's about 20 to
30 pounds heavier than that of the Coyote. Again, these are kind of varying based on the different trim configurations for whichever car they might be in, but at least it kind of gives you an idea the actual mass. So in this case, we're actually replacing the 2.7 liter, 3 liter that would be in one of these in its top trim with a motor that's effectively lighter in almost every way. And as you guys see here, we're pretty much putting it in the same position, expecting a little bit better weight distribution. And to go even further, I know a lot of folks were interested in the larger V8s that Ford recently came out with. So notably the 7.3 liter Godzilla, which has a huge following right now for swaps into something like this, as well as the older Mod Motor series like that of the 6.2, pretty much being replaced by the new 7.3 and 6.8 that are coming out. So these are really in a different tier when it comes to weight. The 7.3 liter Godzilla is, I believe, around 550 pounds dry, and the old Mod Motor not making a lot of sense to run in much anymore. So this is what, for instance, came in the first gen Raptor. Those are even heavier at 580 pounds, and so a lot of suspension work would have to be done in order to actually get these engines effectively into these cars, into the 6th gen Broncos. And so that's just something to keep aware of. Obviously, some pretty cool motors, super torquey down low, but you still have to consider some other disadvantages in a swap like this.
The EGR and so forth versus on the Coyote. Yeah, with it moved further back, I bet you it's going to be basically the same weight distribution. This is crazy. But literally everything that we had problems with, other than the this first runner on either side with the headers that we had laying on hand, is really the only issue. Everything else is almost perfectly. I'll show you the bottom of the car now, so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, guys. So now we are under the car, and this is the motor with probably about within an inch of where it's actually going to finally be. So I just wanted to show you the kind of clearance and stuff that we're dealing with. Hopefully you can see fairly well. So this is on the driver's side. We've got quite a bit of clearance all around over here. We should be able to easily make that motor mount, kind of see what the exhaust has to do with this steering column. That brake line is going to get pushed out of the way. And then the only thing that we're touching on right now is this little plastic part of the column shifter. So I'm pretty sure this thing is not actually required, or we can make something equivalent. And then there's just a little tab right there coming off a bolt that serves no purpose. I think it's just like an identification marker. Moving over to the other side here, way more space. You'll be able to see easily here how the mount will be with hopefully this V6 mount that we're getting, and then a plate off of those blind holes from the block, essentially making an adjustable mount, and that header has plenty of space to come down here. In terms of wall clearance, so we've got probably about at the shortest place about an inch on this side. So this is this side with the way the firewall and the actual steel behind it is constructed. There's way more clearance on this side, and I say way more, it's not terribly much more, versus right there. So I've moved it back a little bit. Right now it's about a quarter of an inch or so, but we've still got this firewall installation. We're probably going to replace that with some aluminum, either like fiberglass wrapped aluminum or just some heat shield material, since the headers are going to be running around here, and since this is the inline 4 version, it doesn't have the aluminized heat coating on this side. So we'll probably modify this. That'll give us the space that we need to, but otherwise really, really close. And that last kind of interference that we had down here was with that sway bar. You can see now there is adequate distance between the stock intercooler, I'm sorry, not intercooler, the stock cooler for the transmission, and where the bar here is going to come up. It still needs to be moved. I can't do it with one hand, but regardless, plenty of space. The only issue is the oil is probably going to hit it. But this oil pan is just amazing me right now. This is a completely stock Gen 1, Gen 2 oil pan, and it is sitting almost, let me move this guy, almost perfectly around. It's got like half an inch around right now, I think, around the entire front differential. And even more so after this curve. There's like probably half an inch is the least amount. Everything else here is perfectly cleared. So, trying to get under here without crunching myself. Anyway, this is going together even better than I thought, honestly, guys. It's like the Coyote was meant to fit in here with very, very minimal modifications to parts. So once we get in these headers, the engine mounts, we'll test fit those guys and take off a few of the parts here. And then the big key here is how the transfer case is going to fit. So the Ranger case that we're going to get, which mounts exactly up to this, essentially fits perfectly in line with the cutout for the transfer case here, because it's shorter than the other two units, or at least it's closer to the original Bronco unit that would be in here. So we think it's going to fit perfectly. This thing's about level from distance from the tunnel top, as well as in the center of this guy here. So honestly, this is crazy, guys. So this is kind of a better look underneath of the car as it sits with the Coyote powertrain in it. It is astonishing. You know, the 10R80, very, very similar with the 10R60 casing. Same internals pretty much, just a little bit lower torque rating. But the bell housings, all that stuff. The starter was another one, just remembered. Plenty. I mean, we got a mile of clearance now for that starter. So no issues whatsoever there. And yeah, anyway. Alright guys, so we've had a really successful day. We are astonished with how well this motor fits with stock and lightly modded components right off the bat. Once we got everything stripped away, it took us a few times now to get it in there. We got the headers, we got that oil pan. Very minimal things are going to have to get done ultimately to get this motor into the car in its final position. So really the big ones, the engine mounts, the trans mount, and I think just a few clearance things here or there. But you know, with the footage you guys just saw, this is really a piece of cake when it comes to trying to get this new of a motor into a modern vehicle like this. This is way better than I thought it would turn out. So next episode, we're going to throw in the new headers once we get them. We're going to throw in the rest of the accessories, so the starter, the alternator, and some of the other things that we are missing right now. Make sure everything else is clearing, and we'll have the oil pan on again, and then hopefully we should have the new transfer case that's going to show up for it. And yeah, once we have all of those components, we'll have the fab for the motor mounts and that trans mount. That'll probably be a good bit of time to get those all tigged and migged up. Other than that, we're going to have to just start planning for the electrical work, because that's going to be the key for this build. So remember, like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what you guys think down below. This is just crazy how well this is coming together. So remember, stay tuned for the next episode. Join the faction. We'll catch you guys later.